The encrypted traffic map on my screen wasn't behaving the way it should. 3 separate data streams were bouncing through a relay chain that made no operational sense. I leaned closer to the monitor inside the skiff at Fort Meade, scrolling through packet logs, while the steady hum of chilled server racks filled the room around me. The air smelled faintly of ozone, cold metal, and the industrial-grade filtration system that never seemed to stop running. I highlighted another anomaly, then another. My shift had started less than an hour earlier, and I was already building a report for a briefing scheduled later that afternoon. My phone started vibrating inside my locker. Normally, I ignored personal notifications during work. This one kept buzzing. I pushed my chair back, crossed the room, and checked the screen through the locker vent. Northern Trust Bank, accounts deep alerts. That got my attention. I stepped through the proper security procedures, signed out of the classified system, and retrieved the phone. The message was short. Your accounts have been frozen pursuant to civil injunction case number 24 CV1187. For a second, I thought it was a phishing scam. I opened the banking app. Every account showed the same red banner, restrict. Checking, savings, investment account, everything restricted. I stood there staring at the screen while a staff sergeant walked past, carrying a coffee cup the size of a small fuel tank. "Everything okay, Chief?" he asked. "Depends how much you like surprises." He laughed. I didn't. Welcome back to Ashes of Inheritance, where ordinary women keep their composure while everything around them falls apart and walk away with their dignity intact. If you believe the quietest person at the table is often the one holding the most, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Back at my workstation, I logged into the public court record system from an authorized terminal. 32 seconds later, the case file appeared. Plaintiffs, Diane Hayes and Stephanie Hayes Pritchard. Defendant, Chief Warrant Officer Nora Hayes. Me. I opened the complaint. The number jumped out immediately. 24-1900, not estimated. Exactly 241850, the exact amount missing from my grandfather's estate. I read the filing once, then again, then a third time. Every page somehow became worse. According to my own family, I had used military cyber expertise to embezzle money while deployed overseas. According to my own sister, I manipulated financial records. According to my own parents, I stole from my grandfather's legacies. Creative. Very creative. Also, completely insane. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, had spent 38 years running a machine fabrication business outside Columbus. When he died 11 months earlier, the estate process had been straightforward. Stephanie and I were beneficiaries. The paperwork had been handled by professionals. Nothing about it had been complicated. Yet here I was reading a lawsuit that looked like it had been assembled by someone who watched 3 episodes of a crime show and suddenly became a cybersecurity expert. The complaint included exhibits, bank statements, transfer records, IP address summaries. I studied one of the pages, my eyebrow lifted, then I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was bad, really bad. Whoever created the evidence clearly thought random technical terms automatically sounded convincing. They didn't. The listed network routes weren't military infrastructure. They weren't even close. The formatting alone told me that. I zoomed in. The supposed military proxy chain contained references to commercial VPN nodes that could be purchased online for less than the cost of Stephanie's weekly manicure budget. That wasn't evidence. That was cosplay. Still, the judge had signed the injunction, which meant the situation had already become real. I checked the timestamp on the filing, 3 days earlier. Nobody called, nobody texted, nobody emailed. My mother had sent me a recipe for banana bread 2 nights ago. My father had liked a photo of my Army unit's promotion ceremony. Stephanie had posted a video reviewing a $900 espresso machine. Not one of them mentioned the lawsuit. Interesting priorities. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling tiles. I wasn't angry yet. Anger requires confusion. This wasn't confusing. This was data. And data always leaves fingerprints. I opened Stephanie's social media page, public profile, 2.1 million followers, 3 brand partnerships running simultaneously, luxury skincare, lifestyle coaching, something involving imported candles that apparently changed lives. America remains a fascinating Her most recent post showed her standing beside a brand new white Range Rover. The caption read, "Blessed beyond measure." Sure. I checked the vehicle registration database available through public records. The SUV had been purchased 6 weeks earlier. Cash transaction. Interesting. Very interesting. The estate funds disappeared roughly 7 weeks earlier. Even more interesting. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from my commanding officer. I answered immediately. "Hayes, Chief, everything all right?" "Family emergency." A brief pause. "You need leave immediately." Another pause. Then the response every soldier hopes for when life suddenly detonates. "Take care of it." No speeches, no questions, just trust. Funny how often I found that inside the Army, and not inside my own family. 45 minutes later, I had filed emergency leave paperwork, transferred active responsibilities, and secured every piece of government equipment according to protocol. My issued laptop sat inside a rugged black case beside my duffel bag. The lawsuit documents were saved, the bank records were saved, the exhibits were saved, everything was organized, everything was documented. Because panic is expensive, preparation is cheaper. As I walked through the terminal later that afternoon, I reread one final paragraph from the complaint. The plaintiffs alleged I had orchestrated a sophisticated theft while serving overseas and exploited my military training to conceal the crime. That accusation followed me all the way to the boarding gate. Have you ever had someone accuse you of being exactly what they were secretly becoming themselves? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about truth, accountability, and the moment lies finally collide with reality, remember our new premieres go live every day at 12:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Join us for both and make this channel part of your daily routine. The jet engines roared beneath the cabin floor as the aircraft began its descent toward Ohio, and I opened the lawsuit one more time while the clouds drifted past the window. I kept reading the complaint during the drive from the airport, mostly because I wanted to see whether it became any less ridiculous with repetition. It didn't. The lawsuit sat printed on the passenger seat when I pulled into my parents' neighborhood. The first thing I noticed was the Range Rover, white, brand new, still wearing temporary tags. The window sticker must have come off recently because there was still adhesive residue on the rear glass. I parked across the street and checked the registration information I'd saved earlier. Same vehicle, same purchase date, same timing as the missing estate funds. Convenient. I grabbed my duffel bag and crossed the driveway. Nobody came outside to greet me, not surprising. My mother opened the door before I knocked. "Nora." Her voice sounded strangely cheerful, like I had arrived for Thanksgiving dinner instead of a lawsuit. She stepped aside. I walked in. The house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh flowers. My mother was standing beside the dining room table adjusting a ridiculously oversized floral arrangement that looked expensive enough to require financing. My father sat in the adjacent living room recliner. He glanced up once, then immediately looked back down at a magazine he clearly wasn't reading. That told me more than any conversation could. Arthur Hayes had many flaws. Lying directly wasn't usually one of them. Stephanie was sitting at the kitchen island. A ceramic matcha cup rested beside her phone. She wore an oversized cream-colored sweater, carefully applied makeup, and the exact expression influencers seem to practice in front of mirrors before posting apology videos. Terrified victim, version 2.0. "Thank God you're finally here," she said. Interesting opening line from someone suing me. I set my duffel bag beside the counter. Nobody offered a hug. Nobody asked about the flight. Nobody asked how I was doing. Straight to business, efficient. I appreciated that. My mother folded her hands. We've all been under a lot of stress. There it was, the universal opening statement of people preparing to blame somebody else. I leaned against the counter. What exactly do you think I stole? Stephanie's eyes widened dramatically. Almost impressive. The estate money, Nora. The money that disappeared while I was deployed. She nodded. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still refusing eye contact, still saying nothing. My mother walked toward the kitchen island carrying a folder. The movement looked rehearsed, probably because it was. She placed the folder on the granite countertop and slowly slid it toward me. Settlement agreement. I opened it. The document was 14 pages long. They had clearly paid real money for this. Page 3 caught my attention first. If signed, I would surrender my remaining inheritance rights. Page 5 required me to accept financial responsibility. Page 7 contained language implying acknowledgement of misconduct. Creative. Very creative. My mother spoke softly, the same voice she used when explaining difficult things to neighbors. If you cooperate, we can end this quietly. I kept reading. We don't want criminal charges. I looked up. Criminal charges for something I didn't do. Stephanie placed a hand dramatically against her chest. I can't believe you're still denying it. That nearly made me laugh. Instead, I kept turning pages. My mother continued. We know you've had financial difficulties. I stopped. What financial difficulties? A brief silence. Not long, just enough. The credit card balances. I stared at her, then at Stephanie, then back at my mother. 3 years earlier, I had carried a temporary balance of $4,870 after replacing a transmission in my truck. I paid it off within 4 months. Apparently, that now qualified as motive for felony embezzlement. America really does love a good narrative. We're trying to protect the family name, my mother continued. There it is. Her expression tightened. What does that mean? It means you're more worried about appearances than facts. Stephanie slammed her cup onto the counter. Not hard. Just enough for effect. You always do this. Do what? You act smarter than everybody. The accusation sounded familiar. I'd been hearing versions of it since middle school. Not because I acted superior, because facts are annoying when they disagree with feelings. I closed the settlement packet, then opened the evidence folder. That's when things became genuinely entertaining. Stephanie slid several printed bank statements toward me. Proof. I looked at the first page, then the second, then the third. The documents included transfer logs, timestamps, network routing information, and IP records supposedly linking the transactions to military infrastructure overseas. My sister watched me carefully, waiting, expecting panic, confession, something. Instead, I focused on a single line near the bottom of page 2. A subnet mask. Tiny detail miss. Fatal mistake. I studied it for about 3 seconds, then another 3. Because now I understood exactly what I was looking at. Not military infrastructure, not government routing, not even close. The listed configuration belonged to a cheap commercial VPN service that thousands of people used every day. The kind advertised on podcasts between meal kit subscriptions and mattress promotions. Whoever created these records knew just enough technical language to embarrass themselves. Stephanie mistook my silence for concern. Big mistake. You see it now, don't you? She asked quietly. I looked up. She genuinely believed this would work. That was the strangest part. Not the lawsuit, not the forged records, not even the betrayal. The confidence. The absolute certainty that nobody would know the difference. My mother pushed a pen toward me. A nice one. Heavy. Expensive. Probably intended to make the moment feel important. Just sign. Nobody spoke. My father still wouldn't look at me. Stephanie waited. My mother smiled patiently. The entire room felt disconnected from reality, like everyone had agreed to participate in the same lie and somehow expected me to enjoy them. I picked up the pen, examined it, then set it back down unopened. No signature, no argument, no speech, just a decision. I closed the evidence folder, stood from the counter, and grabbed my duffel bag. "Nora?" my mother asked. I headed toward the back door. "Where are you going?" Stephanie demanded. I finally looked at all three of them. The silence lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I answered, "To find the part you didn't think I'd check." Nobody followed me. Nobody stopped me. I walked through the backyard, crossed the driveway, and got into my truck. 27 minutes later, I checked into room 214 of a roadside motel just outside Columbus for $78.43 a night. Carried my issued laptop inside, locked the door, and opened the evidence file on the small desk beneath the buzzing lamp. I locked the motel room door, pulled the curtains shut, and set the evidence folder beside the laptop. The room smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and whatever air freshener management bought in bulk. A mini refrigerator rattled occasionally beneath the television. Somewhere outside, a truck downshifted on the highway before fading into the distance. Nothing glamorous. Perfect. By 2:30 a.m., the only light in room 214 came from my screen. I wasn't there to hack anything. That's the funny thing about people who watch too much television. They assume every cyber investigation involves dark rooms, stolen passwords, and dramatic green text scrolling across monitors. Real investigations are usually paperwork, lots of paperwork, and patience. I logged into the estate management portal using credentials that were still legally associated with my role as co-executor of my grandfather's estate. That status hadn't been revoked because nobody expected me to examine the records myself. Another mistake. The bank maintains extensive audit trails. Every login, every session, every document download, every transaction, every device connection, every timestamp. Banks love records. That's why criminals usually hate them. I submitted a formal request for raw access logs and server metadata associated with the disputed transfers. Then I waited. 23 minutes later, the files arrived. Compressed archive, 1.8 gigabytes. Beautiful. I downloaded everything and began sorting through the records. The first layer was exactly what Stephanie's lawyer had shown in the lawsuit. Surface-level reports, summaries, filtered data, the version designed for people who don't know what they're looking at. I skipped all of it. The real information lived underneath. 3 hours of scrolling later, I found the routing tables associated with the missing transfers. Now things became interesting. The logs showed multiple connection hops intended to obscure the origin device. Nothing unusual. Commercial VPN chain services do that every day. The problem for the person using them is that banks don't just track IP addresses. They track sessions, device fingerprints, connection behavior, authentication tokens, and a lot of other things that people rarely think about. I opened another data set, then another, then another. 3 medium-sized windows filled the screen. One displayed routing information. One displayed authentication logs. One displayed device metadata. The pieces started then very fast. I checked the first unauthorized transfer, 38452. The second, 51200. The third, $76,000. The remaining transactions completed the total, 241850. Exactly the amount listed in the lawsuit. Exactly the amount frozen by the injunction. Exactly the amount somebody hoped would bury me. I leaned closer to the monitor. The routing chain initially appeared complicated. It wasn't. Complicated and confusing are different things. This was confusing by design. I traced the connection path manually. VPN entry point, VPN relay, additional masking service, bank portal, nothing special. The real clue wasn't the route, it was the endpoint. I pulled up the device registration data attached to the session. There it was. One identifier appeared repeatedly. Same device, same authentication pattern, same session characteristics. Every transfer, every login, every time. I copied the value into my notes. A4C3618B. I stared at it for a moment. Not because the numbers meant anything emotionally, because they meant everything legally. That MAC address identified the physical device initiating the transactions. The thief wasn't some mysterious hacker. The thief was holding the phone. I kept digging. Now I wanted location data. The lawsuit claimed I accessed the estate accounts while deployed overseas, Germany, according to the complaint. Convenient. Unfortunately for whoever invented that story, technology keeps receipts. I opened the geographic access logs, cross-referenced timestamps, compared server pings, mapped network latency, then verified the results through a second dataset and a third because assumptions lose court cases. Verification wins them. The coordinates appeared on the screen. I entered them into a mapping application. Not Germany, not Europe, not a military installation, not even close. I blinked once, then laughed. Actually laughed because the answer was so absurd. The coordinates pointed directly to a boutique coffee shop in downtown Columbus. Briar and Bean Coffee Company. I recognized the name immediately. Not because I'd been there, because Stephanie practically lived there online. I opened Instagram, public account. Millions of followers, thousands of photos, endless perfection. I searched her location tags, Briar and Bean, Briar and Bean, Briar and Bean, again and again and again. There she was smiling beside seasonal drinks. There she was promoting a wellness brand. There she was showing followers how successful people supposedly start their mornings. One particular post stopped me. Date, timestamp, location. I compared it against the banking logs. Exact match, same day. Same time period, same location. The unauthorized transfer while Stephanie was posting photos of cinnamon matcha foam for strangers on the internet. Amazing. The second transaction matched another post, then another, then another. Every major transfer aligned with a social media check-in. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Not circumstantial, not speculative, not emotional, mathematical. I spent another hour organizing everything: chronology, metadata, geolocation records, device identifiers, authentication logs, social media timestamps. Every piece connected cleanly to the next. No gaps, no assumptions, no shortcuts. By 5:17 a.m., the evidence package was complete. I sat back in the chair and rubbed my eyes. For the first time since opening the lawsuit, I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I wasn't thinking about family. I wasn't thinking about Stephanie. I wasn't thinking about evidence. Evidence doesn't care who raised you. Evidence doesn't care who cries louder. Evidence doesn't care who hires the more expensive lawyer. Truth is often surprisingly boring. That's why it's so powerful. I saved the final report. Then I connected the motel printer. The machine looked older than some army equipment I'd used overseas. I wasn't optimistic. I hit print anyway. The printer paused, made a grinding noise, paused again, then finally came alive. Page 1, Page 2, Page 3. The stack grew steadily beside the machine. Routing tables, server logs, chain of custody records, metadata reports, location verification, device analysis. 400 pages. Every sheet another nail in the coffin of a lie. The printer continued spitting out paper while dawn slowly approached outside the motel window. And I watched the growing stack of evidence become something much more dangerous than anger. Proof. I clipped the black-bound report shut, loaded the last page into place, and carried the evidence package out of the motel room before sunrise. The folder weighed just under 9 pounds. I know that because the motel owner had an old shipping scale behind the front desk, and curiosity got the better of me while checking out. 9,000 of paper, 9,000 of facts, 9,000 of problems for anybody betting their future on a lie. By Tuesday morning, I was standing outside courtroom 4B wearing my Army Class A uniform. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish, old wood, and burned coffee from a vending machine down the corridor. Lawyers moved in small groups carrying briefcases and legal pads. A nervous-looking fuzz in a construction uniform sat against the wall, twisting a baseball cap in his hands. Normal courthouse traffic, normal courthouse anxiety. I stood alone beside a row of benches holding the black folder against my side. That part seemed to fascinate people. Alone, no attorney, No assistant, no entourage. Just me. At 8:57 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Out stepped Stephanie, followed by my mother, followed by my father, followed by a man who looked like he charged for breathing, Marcus Thorne. I recognized him immediately from the firm website. Senior litigation partner, 48 years old, 2 law degrees, 3 professional awards, 1 hourly rate that could probably fund a small nation's infrastructure project. The suit alone was impressive. Dark charcoal, perfect tailoring, handmade Italian shoes. The watch on his wrist likely cost more than my truck. Not that I cared. Expensive clothing doesn't make people smarter. It just makes them expensive. Stephanie noticed me first. A smile flashed across her face. Not relief, not nervousness. Satisfaction. The kind people wear when they think the outcome is already decided. She looked incredible, honestly. Professionally incredible. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, designer handbag hanging from one shoulder. If there were Olympic medals for appearing innocent while committing fraud, she'd have qualified for the finals. Her smile arrived instantly. Practiced, controlled, artificial. Arthur saw me last. His expression tightened. Then he looked away. Again, the man was treating eye contact like a felony. Marcus Thorne adjusted his cufflinks and started walking toward me. Confident, relaxed, almost amused. I had seen the type before. Some officers develop it, some executives develop it, some lawyers practically trademark it. The belief that experience automatically guarantees victory. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they meet evidence. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes, his voice was smooth enough to host a podcast. Mr. Thorne, he smiled politely. Professional courtesy, nothing genuine. I was hoping we'd have a chance to speak before the hearing. I imagine you were. That earned a small chuckle. Good. Lawyers like people who seem cooperative. Make surprises more effective later. He glanced at the black folder briefly, then dismissed it. Another mistake. I'd like to offer one final opportunity to resolve this matter. There it was, the settlement pitch. Round 2. I waited. Thorne continued. The digital evidence against you is substantial. Interesting choice of words. Substantial, not conclusive, not overwhelming. Substantial. Lawyers are very careful when they know judges can read. He folded his hands calmly. My clients are still willing to avoid further complications. I nodded. How generous. We all make mistakes. That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was clever, because it was dangerous. There are few things more terrifying than intelligent people defending bad information. Marcus Thorne clearly believed the evidence. Why wouldn't he? Stephanie had probably shown him the fabricated records, the fake routing reports, the manipulated logs, the manufactured narrative. And because the documents looked technical, nobody questioned them. That happens more often than people realize. Complexity creates confidence. Real expertise creates skepticism. My mother stepped closer. Nora, please. The voice. Same voice from the kitchen. Soft, concerned, reasonable. A masterclass in emotional manipulation. We don't want this getting worse. I looked at her. It already did. The smile disappeared for half a second, then returned. Professional. Like Stephanie's. Funny how similar they'd become. My father remained several feet away, pretending to study a courthouse directory mounted on the wall. A grown man suddenly fascinated by office signage. Remarkable. Stephanie finally approached. Slowly, confidently. Her perfume reached me before she did. Expensive jasmine. Probably imported. Probably sponsored. Probably purchased with somebody else's money. She stopped close enough that nobody else could hear her clearly, then leaned toward me. The smirk arrived first. The whisper followed. You really showed up alone? I said nothing. Her smile widened. No lawyer? Still nothing. Then she delivered the line she'd probably rehearsed in the mirror. You lose, Nora. For a second, all I could hear was courthouse noise. Shoes on tile. Elevator doors opening. Someone laughing near the clerk's office. The distant sound of a copier. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. That's what people never understand about life-changing events. Most of them happen in completely normal silence. Stephanie pulled back expecting something. Anger. Fear. Defensiveness is the thing. Instead, I looked at her. Really looked. Not my sister. Not family. Not blood. Just a woman who had convinced herself that confidence and truth were interchangeable. Those are very different things. I checked my watch. 9:03 a.m. Right on schedule. The bailiff stepped into the hallway. Courtroom 4B is now in session. The conversations around us immediately died down. Lawyers gathered their files. People stood. Movement filled the corridor. Marcus Thorne adjusted his jacket. Stephanie smiled one final time. My mother folded her hands. My father looked exhausted. I straightened the collar of my uniform, shifted the black-bound report under one arm, and walked toward the courtroom doors, without responding to a single one of them. Behind me, I heard Stephanie laughing quietly to herself. Ahead of me, the heavy oak doors swung open as the bailiff called the room to order. I took my seat at the defense table while the courtroom settled into silence. The room wasn't particularly large. Dark wood paneling covered the walls. A county seal hung behind the bench. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead while people shuffled papers and adjusted chairs. Judge Robert Caldwell entered exactly on time. Everyone stood, then sat. Then the performance began. Marcus Thorne rose first, confident, comfortable, completely convinced he controlled the room. The judge glanced at the docket. Civil action regarding estate assets, counsel, proceed. Thorne buttoned his jacket and walked toward the center of the courtroom. He moved like someone delivering a speech he'd already rehearsed 50 times. Your Honor, this case is unfortunately a straightforward example of financial abuse facilitated through specialized technical knowledge. Strong opening. Wrong, but strong. He turned slightly toward me. The defendant, Chief Warrant Officer Nora Hayes, possessed both access and capability. Capability. Interesting word. People love capability. Capability sounds suspicious. Capability sounds dangerous. Capability sounds guilty. The problem is that capability doesn't equal action. Otherwise, every chef would be a restaurant thief. Every mechanic would be stealing cars, and every lawyer would be in prison. Thorne continued. My clients trusted the defendant as co-executor of the estate belonging to the late Walter Hayes. He walked slowly across the floor. Measured pace, professional voice, textbook courtroom presentation. Instead of honoring that trust, she exploited her military cyber expertise to conceal a series of unauthorized transfers totaling $2,418.50. Several heads turned toward me. Normal. Numbers always make accusations feel real, especially large numbers. Thorne clicked a remote. A display monitor beside the jury box illuminated. Bank records appeared, the fake ones, Stephanie's artwork. There they were, manufactured routing logs, fabricated network paths, the same commercial VPN records dressed up to look like military infrastructure. I almost admired the commitment. Almost. Thorne pointed toward the screen. The evidence will demonstrate repeated access originating through sophisticated proxy networks while the defendant was stationed overseas. Sophisticated. Another favorite word. People often use sophisticated when they don't understand something. Judges usually notice. I watched Judge Caldwell carefully. His expression remained neutral. Good. Neutral judges are dangerous to liars. Marcus kept going. The stolen funds deprived my client, Mrs. Stephanie Hayes Pritchard, of her rightful inheritance. On cue, Stephanie lowered her eyes. Perfect timing. Academy Award timing. If tears taxable, she'd owe the IRS a fortune. Thorne approached the plaintiff table. My client suffered significant emotional distress. That nearly made me smile. The woman who bought a luxury SUV with stolen money was now the injured party. America truly is the land of opportunity. The judge listened quietly. Thorne continued building his narrative, each sentence slightly larger than the previous one, each accusation slightly more dramatic. By the end of the presentation, I sounded less like an Army cyber officer and more like an international criminal mastermind operating from a secret bunker somewhere beneath Germany. Very flattering. Not accurate, but flattering. Then came the gallery performance. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Not sobbing, not dramatic, just enough. Years of practice. Diane Hayes understood exactly how much emotion to display. Too little looked cold, too much looked fake. She operated in the sweet spot. Arthur sat beside her, head lowered, occasionally nodding, looking disappointed, looking heartbroken, looking like a man attending his own daughter's funeral. The fact that the daughter was alive and sitting 20 feet away didn't seem to matter. Thorne noticed the reaction and wisely incorporated it. The emotional impact on this family has been devastating. Another glance toward Diane, another tissue. Beautiful coordination. Honestly, if fraud didn't work out, they could have started a theater company. The judge eventually interrupted. "Mr. Thorne, let's focus on evidence." "Good sign, very good sign." Thorne nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Honor." He submitted the altered bank statements. The clerk marked them as exhibits, one after another, stack after stack. Pages filled with technical language intended to overwhelm rather than inform. Thorne returned to the center of the courtroom. These records clearly establish unauthorized activity. No, they established printed activity. Different thing. Then he delivered what was supposed to be the finishing blow. The defendant appears today without legal representation. He paused strategically, carefully. As the court knows, unrepresented parties often struggle to appreciate the complexity of financial litigation. There it was. Not subtle, not accidental. The implication hung in the room. Poor Nora, confused Nora, outmatched Nora, the military woman who wandered into court without understanding what she was facing. A few people in the gallery glanced at me, waiting, expecting something. Panic, anger, a desperate explanation, maybe even a request for mercy. Instead, I sat quietly, because the hardest thing for arrogant people to process is silence. Thorne finished his argument confidently, smoothly, certain victory was only minutes away. Then he returned to counsel table and adjusted his cuffs. Stephanie smiled. My mother relaxed visibly. Arthur finally looked at me for the first time all morning, only briefly, then away again. Judge Caldwell removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, reviewed several pages, then several more. The room waited. The judge exhaled slowly, not impressed, not convinced, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from listening to people turn simple facts into complicated stories. He placed the papers down, adjusted his glasses, then looked directly at me. I knew exactly what he expected, an emotional speech, a denial, a plea for court-appointed assistance, something, anything. Instead, I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Every head turned. I reached beside the defense table and lifted the heavy black-bound folder. The weight felt reassuring. 400 pages. Every page earned, every page verified, every page documented. Without saying a word, I carried the folder toward the bench while the entire courtroom watched. I stopped beside the bench and handed the folder to the bailiff. The weight surprised him. That was understandable. Most people don't expect truth to weigh 9 pounds. Your Honor, I said calmly, I am submitting a certified digital forensic analysis compiled through lawful metadata requests, complete with chain of custody logs and supporting documentation. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Caldwell looked at the folder, then at me, then back at the folder. Digital forensic analysis? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus Thorne immediately stood. Objection. We have not reviewed. The judge raised one finger, not angry, not loud, just enough. Thorne sat back down. The bailiff carried the black-bound report to the bench. Every eye in the room followed it. Stephanie's smile had faded slightly, only slightly, probably because she still assumed nobody could understand the technical records. A common mistake. People often confuse complexity with protection. Judge Caldwell examined the cover page, then the certification documents, then the chain of custody section. The courtroom remained completely still. No coughing, no shuffling, no whispering, nothing. The judge reached for the sealed evidence packet attached to the front. The federal certification seal stretched across the opening. Official, documented, verifiable. He broke it. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the room. Not because it was loud, because nobody was breathing. The judge opened the report, read the first page. His expression changed very slightly. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Years of military briefings teach you to watch faces, especially the faces of people trained not to react. Judge Caldwell turned the page, then another, then another. The courtroom waited. Marcus Thorne shifted in his chair. My mother looked confused. Arthur looked nervous. Stephanie looked annoyed. The judge continued reading. 5 pages, 10, 15, 20. The silence stretched longer and longer. Finally, he stopped. His eyes remained fixed on the report. Not on me, not on Thorne, not on anyone. Just the evidence. Good. Evidence was exactly where I wanted his attention. The judge adjusted his glasses, then began reviewing the technical exhibits page by page, line by line, slowly, very slowly. The first section contained routing analysis, commercial VPN entry nodes, connection chains, authentication sequences, the exact information Stephanie's fabricated records had tried to disguise. The judge studied every page, then moved to the next section. Device metadata, session records, hardware identifiers. That was where the room started changing. I could feel it. Not emotionally, physically. The atmosphere shifted, the way air changes before a thunderstorm. The judge stopped on one particular page, read it again, then once more. His eyes moved toward the timestamp column. Back to the timestamp column again. A4C3618B. The device, the same device, every transfer, every login, every session, every unauthorized movement of money. The judge flipped forward, then backward, verifying, cross-checking, doing exactly what judges are supposed to do. The truth doesn't fear scrutiny, only lies do. Marcus Thorne finds may lean forward, concerned replacing confidence, a subtle change, but real. He no longer looked like a man giving a victory speech. He looked like a man trying to calculate where things went wrong. Judge Caldwell continued. The geolocation section came next. Latitude coordinates, longitude coordinates, timestamp verification, network latencies analysis, independent location confirmation. 3 separate validation methods, no assumptions, no guesses, no speculation, just math. The judge studied the location report, then stopped moving tiredly. For several seconds, he simply stared at the page. That got everyone's attention, including Stephanie's. She finally looked nervous. Tiny signs, a tighter jaw, a slower blink, a hand gripping the edge of the table. The judge turned another page, then another. Coffee shop records, location taggings, social media timestamps, cross-reference transaction windows. The exact dates the money disappeared. The exact dates the device appeared at Briar and Bean Coffee Company in downtown Columbus. The exact date Stephanie had posted photographs from that location. The same location, the same time periods, the same device, the same transactions, the same person. There was nowhere left for coincidence to hide. Judge Caldwell slowly removed his glasses. The movement felt deliberate, measured, controlled. Then he lowered them slightly and looked directly at Stephanie. Not her attorney, not me, Stephanie. The effect was immediate. Her posture changed. People always imagine guilt looks dramatic. Usually it doesn't. Usually it looks like someone realizing they no longer control the room. For the first time since I'd arrived at my parents' house, Stephanie looked uncertain. Marcus Thorne stood abruptly. Your Honor, I would like clarification regarding the contents of that report. No response. Your Honor? Nothing. The judge wasn't interested in Marcus anymore. That was the problem. Lawyers win arguments. Evidence wins judges. Judge Caldwell closed the folder halfway, then looked toward the gallery, toward my parents. Arthur visibly froze. My mother stopped pretending to cry. The performance ended instantly. Amazing how quickly theater disappears when reality arrives. The judge held their gaze for several long seconds. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe. Then Judge Caldwell placed both hands on the report and finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was cold enough to freeze water. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I sincerely hope both of you understand exactly what appears to have been placed before this court today. The silence after Judge Caldwell's statement lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter. Then the judge looked down at the report again, turned one page, then another. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne. The attorney immediately stood. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell removed his glasses completely and placed them on the bench. A small gesture, a dangerous one. Are you aware that your client's device initiated every single transfer she claims was stolen? The room froze. Not metaphorically, actually twice. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion so quickly it almost looked painful. Your Honor, The judge raised a hand. Not interested. Not yet. He opened the report again. I have before me a certified forensic analysis containing authenticated session records, device identifiers, geolocation verification, and financial tracing. Thorne swallowed. Stephanie stopped breathing. At least it looked that way. The confidence she'd carried into court was gone, completely gone. Judge Caldwell continued. The originating device identifier appears on every unauthorized transaction. He looked down at the page, A4C3618B. Then he looked directly at Stephanie. The same device. Nobody in the gallery moved. Nobody wanted to. Because everybody could feel what was happening. The floor beneath the story was disappearing. The judge turned another page. This report further demonstrates that the transfers did not originate from Germany. Another page. They did not originate from any military installation. Another page. They originated from Columbus, Ohio. Another page. Specifically, a commercial location identified as Breyer and Bean Coffee Company. Stephanie's face lost all color, every bit of it. The woman who had looked flawless in the hallway now looked like she was trying not to pass out. Marcus finally found his voice. Your Honor, I would respectfully request additional time to review. No. The answer came instantly, sharp, final. The judge wasn't angry. That's what made it worse. Anger leaves room for argument. Certainty does not. Judge Caldwell turned toward the financial tracing section. The room somehow became even quieter. I didn't think that possible. Then he began reading, slowly, clearly, every word landing exactly where it needed to. The funds were not transferred to an offshore account. Page turn. The funds were not transferred to any unidentified recipient. Page turn. The funds were not transferred outside the United States. Another page. The funds were transferred directly into an account controlled by Hayes Lifestyle Holdings, LLC. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Caldwell glanced toward Stephanie. An entity registered under Stephanie Hayes Pritchard. There it was. The first hammer. Not the last, just the first. The judge continued reading. The forensic accounting records further demonstrate that approximately $9,000 from the disputed funds were utilized as a deposit payment to Hawthorne Manor events. A few people exchanged looks. The name meant nothing to them. It meant something to Stephanie. Her eyes closed briefly. Judge Caldwell wasn't finished. Records supplied by the vendor indicate this payment corresponded to wedding venue reservations made under the name Stephanie Hayes Pritchard. The second hammer landed. Harder. Marcus looked physically sick. Actually sick. The kind of expression lawyers get when they suddenly realize they've been handed a grenade disguised as evidence. Then came the third, the fatal one. The remaining funds were utilized through contracted renovation payments, totaling approximately $15,000. Page turn. The beneficiary property is identified as the residence currently owned by Stephanie Hayes Pritchard. Another page. The invoices include kitchen remodeling, structural updates, flooring replacement, and laundry bathroom installations. Judge Caldwell looked up. No emotion, no drama, just facts. Mrs. Hayes Pritchard, according to the documentation before this court, the stolen inheritance appears to have financed your wedding and your home. The room exploded. Not physically, emotionally. Stephanie jumped to her feet. No. The word echoed through the courtroom. Several people flinched. Marcus closed his eyes, probably wishing he could disappear. That's not true. Judge Caldwell remained still. Stephanie pointed directly at me. She hacked it. There it was. The desperation phase. They told me she was some kind of cyber expert. Nobody responded. Stephanie became louder, more frantic, more reckless. She hacked my phone. She planted everything. I watched the panic take over. Not because I enjoyed it, because panic removes discipline, and discipline was the only thing protecting her before. The judge waited for her to finish. Then he calmly opened another section of the report. One page, then another, then another. His eyes settled on a document. When he spoke again, his voice was almost conversational. Ma'am. Stephanie stopped talking. Not voluntarily. Apparently, the words simply cut through her. Judge Caldwell held up a page. Unless your sister also hacked the catering contract for your wedding venue, bearing your wet ink signature. He lifted another document. And unless she additionally hacked the renovation agreement signed by you. Another document. And unless she somehow forged every banking authorization associated with your LLC. The judge placed the papers on the bench, then delivered the sentence that ended everything. You are lying to this court. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody even blinked. The entire room simply absorbed it. A judge had just stripped away every remaining layer of the story. No arguments left. No explanations left. No performance left. Just reality. Marcus slowly lowered himself into his chair, defeated. My mother looked like she had forgotten how to function. The tissue remained frozen in her hand. Arthur stared at Stephanie with an expression I had never seen before. Not disappointment, recognition. Like he was finally meeting the person she'd become. Judge Caldwell signed several documents, one after another, deliberately, then handed them to the clerk. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The words landed like concrete. Finished. Permanent. Over. Stephanie sat down so abruptly, her chair rolled backward. The judge wasn't done. He turned toward the bailiff. Retain the forensic report and all supporting exhibits. The bailiff nodded. Judge Caldwell looked toward the clerk. I am formally referring this matter to the district attorney for review of potential perjury and federal wire fraud. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because lawsuits end, criminal investigations begin. My mother closed her eyes. Arthur slumped backward into his seat. Stephanie stared forward in complete shock, while the life she had spent years building collapsed under the weight of her own paperwork. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, nobody in the Hayes family had anything left to say. The scrape of chairs against the courtroom floor followed me into the hallway. Not fast and not dramatic. Just the sound of a room full of people realizing the story they believed no longer existed. The heavy doors closed behind me. For the first time in days, nobody was asking me a question. Nobody was accusing me of anything. Nobody was trying to convince me to sign a document. The corridor felt strangely quiet. Then Stephanie's voice shattered it. "This is your fault." I turned slightly. She stood 20 feet away near the courtroom entrance, tears streaming down her face. Not performance tears, not social media tears, real ones. The kind people cry when consequences finally become real. Marcus Thorne stood beside her, looking like a man who had just discovered a snake inside his briefcase. His confidence was gone. His expensive suit suddenly looked uncomfortable. Stephanie grabbed his arm. "You said we'd win." Several people walking through the hallway immediately slowed down. Nobody wanted to admit they were listening. Everybody listened anyway. Thorne pulled his arm away. "Stephanie, I represented the information you provided." His voice had changed. "Careful. Very careful. Lawyers become extremely precise when their professional licenses start appearing in danger. You told me the records were legitimate." "They were." "No." The answer came immediately. "Flat? Sharp?" "No. They were not." Stephanie stared at him, shocked, like betrayal was only acceptable when she was doing it to someone else. Marcus rubbed both hands across his face. For a moment, he looked less like a high-powered attorney and more like a man calculating billable hours wasted on a disaster. "I need to contact my malpractice carrier." That sentence hit her harder than the judge's ruling because it told her something important. Her lawyer wasn't planning a comeback. He was planning damage control for himself. Interesting how quickly loyalty disappears when legal liability arrives. Stephanie started crying harder. My mother appeared next, then my father. Neither of them looked anything like the people who sat in the kitchen a few days earlier. Gone was the certainty. Gone was the moral superiority. Gone was the quiet confidence that I'd eventually surrender. They looked exhausted, smaller somehow, older. I don't know how else to describe it. My mother opened her mouth first, then closed it. Nothing came out. For once in her life, she didn't seem to have a script ready. Arthur stepped forward instead, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal. "Nora." I waited. His shoulders sagged. "We didn't understand." The sentence hung there, weak, fragile, insufficient. He looked toward the courtroom doors, toward the place where everything had collapsed. "We didn't understand all the technology." There it was, the explanation. Not an excuse exactly, not quite an apology either. Something in between. "We thought..." He stopped. "We thought Stephanie was telling the truth." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The gray hair, the tired eyes, the wrinkles I didn't remember being there before. For a second, I saw the father who taught me how to ride a bike, the father who coached Little League, the father who used to wake up early every Christmas morning making too much coffee. Then I remembered something else. The father who signed a lawsuit accusing me of a felony. Both versions existed. That was the hard part. People aren't usually monsters. They're usually people who keep making cowardly choices until somebody gets hurt. Arthur swallowed hard. "We just wanted to keep the peace." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was honest. Painfully honest. Keeping the peace had been his specialty my entire life. Whenever Stephanie lied, whenever Mom manipulated, whenever something unfair happened, keep the peace. Don't make things worse. Let it go. Be the bigger person. Funny thing about that philosophy. The peace usually comes from somebody else paying the price. This time it had almost been me. My mother stepped forward. "Nora, we never thought..." "Yes, you did." The words came out calm. No anger, no raised voice, just truth. The hallway fell silent. My mother stopped speaking, because we both knew it was true. They had thought about it. The lawsuit, the accusations, the frozen accounts, the possibility of criminal charges. They thought about all of it, and they proceeded anyway, because protecting Stephanie felt easier than questioning her. That's what hurt. Not the lie, The choice. Arthur looked down at the floor, ashamed, maybe for the first time. I don't know how to fix this. That was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said all week. Because he couldn't. Some things break beyond repair. Not because they're impossible to rebuild. Because nobody starts rebuilding until after they're already destroyed. I adjusted the folder under my arm. The same folder that had saved me. The same folder none of them bothered to ask about before deciding I was guilty. My father finally looked up. His eyes were red, not crying, close. Nora. I waited. The words sounded real. Maybe because they arrived too late to accomplish anything. Real apologies often do. I took a breath, then looked at both of them. The people who were willing to let me lose everything, so a lie could survive a little longer. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprises me. Standing there, I realized anger requires attachment, and something inside me had quietly let go. I spoke softly, the way people do when they're no longer trying to win an argument. Dignity isn't something you can buy with stolen money, Dad. Neither of them moved. And trust isn't a file you can just delete and recover. My mother closed her eyes. Arthur head. No defense, no explanation, nothing left. I turned away. The conversation was over. Not because I wanted revenge, because there was nothing else worth saying. My boots echoed steadily across the marble floor as I walked down the corridor toward the courthouse exit. Behind me, I could hear Stephanie crying. I could hear lawyers talking. I could hear lives rearranging themselves around reality. For once, none of it belonged to me. The courthouse doors opened. Cool Ohio air met my face. I stepped outside and paused for a moment beneath the courthouse steps. The sky looked exactly the same as it had before all of this started. Cars moved through the intersection. People crossed the street. Life continued, simple, ordinary, unimpressed by anybody's drama. I took one last breath and walked away without looking back, leaving my family inside the prison they had built for themselves, and carrying something far more valuable than an inheritance, my freedom. I drove for nearly 40 minutes after leaving the courthouse before I realized I hadn't turned on the radio. The silence didn't bother me. For years, silence had felt uncomfortable. After everything that happened, it felt expensive. Valuable, too. I pulled into a small diner outside Newark and ordered coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on a burner since the previous presidential administration. The waitress called me hon 3 times in under 2 minutes and kept refilling my cup without asking. Ohio has its own charm. I sat by the window watching people move through an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A delivery driver unloading boxes, a couple arguing about directions, a teenager rushing across the parking lot carrying 2 milkshakes. Normal life. The kind of life that continues whether your family explodes or not. And sitting there, I realized something important. The lawsuit wasn't actually where the story began. Most people would think it started with the missing money, or the forged documents, or the courtroom. It didn't. It started years earlier, long before any inheritance existed, long before Stephanie learned how to turn victimhood into a business model, long before my parents convinced themselves they were protecting the family. It started with expectations. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Stephanie forgot things. I remembered them. Stephanie caused problems. I solved them. Stephanie made emotional decisions. I cleaned up the consequences. At first, it looked harmless. Families do that sometimes. One child becomes dependable, the other becomes protected. Nobody notices the imbalance because it developed slowly. Then one day, everybody treats it like a permanent law of nature. I remember being 16 and giving up a summer trip because Stephanie got herself into trouble and my parents needed help. I remember working extra shifts in college while Stephanie switched majors 3 times because she hadn't found herself yet. I remember paying for our father's birthday dinner one year because Stephanie forgot to transfer her half. Forgot. Interesting word. People forget things when somebody else always remembers for them. The pattern never changed, only the price tag changed. And that's a lesson I wish more people understood. When you become the family fixer, your usefulness slowly replaces your humanity. People stop asking what is fair. They start asking what you'll tolerate. That's dangerous because responsible people often mistake endurance for virtue. I certainly did. I told myself I was helping. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself keeping peace made me a better daughter. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it just made me easier to use. There is a difference, a big one. The truth is that many families accidentally create unhealthy systems without ever discussing them. One person becomes the caretaker. One becomes the problem. One becomes the peacemaker. One becomes the favorite. Then everybody gets assigned a role and spends years pretending it isn't happening. The role assigned to me was simple: handle it. Whatever the problem was, handle it. Somebody forgot a bill, handle it. Somebody needed money, handle it. Somebody made a mistake, handle it. Somebody lied, handle it quietly. Because heaven forbid the truth create discomfort. The problem with constantly being the reliable person is that people begin treating your strength like a public utility, available at all times, free of charge, no maintenance required. That mindset nearly cost me everything. Not because my family hated me. That's the strange part. I don't think they hated me. I think they became accustomed to me absorbing consequences. And when the inheritance money disappeared, they followed the same pattern they'd followed my entire life. Find the reliable one. Assign the burden. Move forward. Simple, until it wasn't. Sitting in that diner, I thought about something Judge Caldwell never said out loud. The courtroom wasn't really about technology. It wasn't about cybersecurity. It wasn't even about money. It was about accountability. Technology just happened to expose it. If the evidence had never existed, my family would have sacrificed me to protect a lie. That's a difficult sentence to say. It's even harder to accept. But avoiding uncomfortable truths doesn't make them less true. It just makes them more expensive later. That's the lesson I want anyone listening to understand. Being strong does not mean accepting mistreatment. Being responsible does not mean accepting blame. Being kind does not mean surrendering your boundaries. Those things get confused all the time, especially inside families. People will tell you that setting boundaries is selfish, usually the people benefiting from your lack of boundaries. Funny how that works. The older I get, the more I believe dignity requires limits, not walls, not bitterness. Limits. The ability to say no without explaining yourself for 3 hours afterward. The ability to recognize manipulation even when it comes wrapped in family language. The ability to stop carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. I finished my coffee and looked out the window one last time. The teenager with the milkshakes was laughing with friends. The delivery driver had moved on to another stop. Life kept moving as it should. And if there's one thing I learned from everything that happened, it's this. If someone constantly asks you to sacrifice your peace, your reputation, your finances, or your future in order to keep the family together, stop and ask yourself a question. Why is the peace always being purchased with your life and never theirs? That question stayed with me for a long time after I left the diner. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I finally did. Over the next few months, something strange happened. Really quiet. No dramatic confrontations, no surprise visits, no emotional ambushes disguised as family conversations. Just silence. The first few weeks felt unusual. When you've spent years managing other people's emergencies, the absence of chaos almost feels suspicious. I kept expecting another crisis, another demand, another objection for why somebody else's bad decision had somehow become my responsibility. Nothing came. And that's when I noticed something important. Many relationships don't end when conflict happens. They end when access disappears. There is a difference, a very big difference. People often confuse being loved with being needed. They're not the same thing. Someone can need your money, need your stability, need your patience, need your forgiveness, need your ability to solve problems, and still not genuinely care about you as a person. That's a hard lesson, especially when family is involved. Because family relationships come with emotional shortcuts. We assume history automatically creates loyalty. We assume blood automatically creates respect. We assume shared DNA automatically creates healthy relationships. Reality doesn't always cooperate. One evening, about 4 months after the court case, I was sitting in my apartment reviewing training schedules for an upcoming cyber operations exercise when my phone buzzed. My mother's name appeared on the screen. The first call in nearly 6 weeks. I let it ring, not out of revenge, out of caution. That distinction matters. Healthy boundaries and revenge look similar from the outside. The motivation is completely different. The voicemail arrived 30 seconds later. Nora, I just wanted to see how you're doing. Nothing else. No apology, no accountability, no mention of court, just a casual check-in. The kind people use when they want to skip over the difficult part and return directly to normal. I listened twice, then deleted it. Because sometimes silence communicates more clearly than another argument. A few days later, I started thinking about all the people I'd met throughout my Army career. Soldiers, officers, civilian contractors, friends, people from every possible background, and a pattern emerged. The healthiest relationships in my life shared one thing. Those people cared about me even when I had nothing useful to offer. Think about that for a second. Not when I could help. Not when I could solve problems. Not when I could provide resources. Just me. Several years earlier, I spent 6 months deployed overseas, working 14-hour shifts in an operations center. During one particularly miserable week, a fellow warrant officer named Mike noticed I hadn't taken a proper lunch break in 3 days. On Thursday, he dropped a sandwich on my desk and walked away. No speech, no lecture, no favor expected later, just a sandwich. The total value was probably $8.47. The lesson was priceless. Real care often looks small. Manipulation usually looks dramatic. That's why people get confused. The people who genuinely care about you rarely need an audience. The people using you often do. Looking back, I realized many conversations with Stephanie followed the same pattern. She called when she needed something. Money advice, technical help, a favor, support, a problem solved. But very rarely curiosity, very rarely concern, very rarely interest in my actual life. And I accepted it for years because I thought family relationships worked differently. I was wrong. Healthy relationships follow the same rules whether the person shares your last name or not. Mutual respect, honesty, reciprocities, accountability. Without those things, you're not building connection. You're managing dependency. That's another lesson worth remembering. Dependency often disguises itself as closeness. Someone constantly needs you, calls you, relies on you, demands access to your time and energy. From the outside, it can look like love. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you're simply the nearest source of stability. And stability attracts people the way porch lights attract bugs. Not every visitor belongs inside the house. One of the most important things I learned from everything that happened is that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse them. You can forgive someone and still lock the door. You can forgive someone and stop answering midnight phone calls. You can forgive someone and refuse to hand them the steering wheel of your life again. Forgiveness heals you. Access benefits them. Those are separate decisions. Nobody talks about that enough. When I tell people this story, some ask whether I've forgiven my family. The honest answer is yes, mostly. Carrying permanent anger is exhausting, but forgiveness did not magically restore trust. Trust operates differently. Trust is built through consistency, through honesty, through time. And trust destroyed by repeated choices cannot be repaired with a single apology. That's not punishment. That's reality. By the end of that year, I noticed something else. The people remaining in my life were different. Fewer, but better. Conversations felt lighter. Relationships felt safer. I wasn't constantly evaluating motives. I wasn't watching for hidden agendas. I wasn't wondering what somebody wanted from me. That kind of peace is difficult to appreciate until you've lived without it. So if there's one lesson I hope people take from this part of my story, it's this. Pay close attention to who remembers you when you have nothing to offer except your company. Because the people who genuinely value you will still show up when there is nothing to gain. Those are the relationships worth protecting. It took me a long time to understand that. Not because the lesson was complicated, because I kept hoping reality would be different. Most people imagine stories like mine end in a courtroom. The judge rules, the bad person loses, the good person wins, credits roll, life continues. Real life doesn't work that way. The courtroom wasn't the ending. It was just the moment the truth became public. The real ending happened afterward, quietly, over months, in ordinary moments nobody would ever put in a movie. One Saturday morning, I woke up without immediately checking my phone. That sounds insignificant. It wasn't. For years, part of me had been conditioned to expect problems. Somebody needed something. Somebody was upset. Somebody wanted help. Somebody wanted access. That morning, I made coffee, sat on my balcony, and watched a delivery driver struggle with an apartment gate code for almost 10 minutes. Life felt normal. For the first time in a long time, normal felt extraordinary. A few months later, one of the younger soldiers in my unit asked me a question after a training exercise. "Chief, how do you know when you're finally over something?" Good question. I thought about it for a while. Then I gave him the most honest answer I could. You stop rehearsing conversations that are never going to happen. He looked confused. I understood. I would have been confused too, a few years earlier. When people hurt us, we often replay everything. The argument, the betrayal, the speech we wish we'd given, the apology we wish they'd offered. We keep reliving it because part of us still believes we can change the ending. Eventually, if you're lucky, you stop. Not because you forget, because you accept. Acceptance is underrated. People talk about revenge, justice, closure. Those things get all the attention. Acceptance does most of the heavy lifting. Accepting that some people won't become who you hoped they would be. Accepting that fairness is not guaranteed. Accepting that being related to someone does not automatically make them safe. Accepting that your value doesn't depend on whether other people recognize it. That last one changed my life. For years, I wanted my parents to see me clearly. I wanted them to understand. I wanted them to acknowledge what happened. I wanted them to choose truth over convenience, reasonable desires, human desires. But eventually, I realized something. If your self-worth depends on approval from people committed to misunderstanding you, you're giving away far too much power. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for validation from the wrong audience. Don't do that. Seriously, don't. Some people will never give you the recognition you deserve because doing so would require them to confront their own behavior. And that's a price many people refuse to pay. The older I get, the more I believe freedom has very little to do with money. The inheritance mattered, the lawsuit mattered, the court victory mattered. But none of those things became the most valuable outcome. The most valuable thing I gained was perspective. I stopped measuring my worth through other people's expectations. I stopped volunteering for emotional jobs nobody assigned themselves. I stopped confusing guilt with responsibility. That lesson alone probably saved me years of future pain. If you're listening to this story and taking notes, write this one down. Guilt asks how people feel. Responsibility asks what is actually yours. Those answers are often very different. Another lesson worth remembering: never sign documents simply because the person handing them to you shares your last name. Family relationships deserve trust. Trust must still be earned. Blind trust isn't loyalty, it's negligence. And please don't ignore small warning signs because confronting them feels uncomfortable. People rarely wake up one morning and suddenly betray someone. Most betrayals are built from dozens of smaller choices that got ignored along the way. Excuses become habits. Habits become patterns. Patterns become character. Then one day everybody acts surprised. Don't wait for that day. Attention early. Protect yourself early. Respect yourself early. Looking back now, I don't think the most important lesson from my story is about fraud or lawsuits or forensic evidence. It's about dignity, real dignity, not pride, not ego. Dignity, the ability to stand in the truth even when standing there costs you relationships. The ability to walk away from manipulation without becoming cruel. The ability to choose self-respect over approval. That kind of dignity changes everything. And if my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. You do not owe unlimited access to people simply because they share your blood. You do not owe your future to somebody else's bad decisions. You do not owe your peace to people who profit from your sacrifice. And you never have to shrink yourself so somebody else can stay comfortable. The strongest people I know aren't the loudest. They're the ones who finally learn where their responsibility ends. Thank you for spending some time with me and following this story all the way to the end. If this story helped you see your own situation more clearly, gave you the courage to establish healthier boundaries, or reminded you that your dignity has value, I'd appreciate you subscribing to the channel. We share new stories every day at 12:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Join our community, leave a comment about the lesson that stayed with you the most, and I'll see you in the next story.